Number 2. Phantom social workers. Phantom social workers, also called bogus social workers, is the name given to a phenomena that was first reported in early 1990, peaked in the mid-1990s, and continues to be sporadically reported to this day. Most reports come from the United Kingdom, although the phenomena has also been reported in the United States, Australia, and Canada. A typical report of a phantom social worker involves one or more people claiming to be a social worker or claiming to work for a government agency related to children's welfare, showing up at a family's home and asking questions about children in the home, sometimes attempting to examine the children, and sometimes attempting to remove the children from the home. Subsequent inquiries by concerned parents reveal that the agencies which the social worker claims to represent have no record of these individuals working for them. Phantom social workers which show up alone will almost always be a woman in her 20s or 30s, and those who show up in groups will usually be 1 or 2 women and a man who appears to act in the role of a supervisor. They are usually professionally dressed and sometimes carry authentic-looking identification cards. The phenomena was so widespread in the early 1990s England that the government launched an official investigation, which was disbanded in 1994 without any arrests being made or any explanation being offered for these bizarre events. Let's take a look at a few typical reports of phantom social worker encounters. A woman named Elizabeth Copeland from Sheffield, England, reported one of the earliest phantom social worker cases in the winter of 1990. One day, 2 women who claimed to be from the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, abbreviated as NSPCC, showed up to her home and asked to examine her 2 young children. Elizabeth allowed them into her home and allowed them to conduct a brief physical examination of her children, after which they left. A few days later, one of the women returned with a man, and they said that they were there to remove the children from her home and place them into foster care. When Elizabeth threatened to call the police, the pair quickly left. The NSPCC knew nothing of these visits and had no record of anyone working for them having visited Elizabeth. In another report from October of 1994, a Scottish woman named Anne Wiley was startled when a woman claiming to be a health worker showed up at her home and asked to examine her young son, who had recently been hospitalized due to an asthma attack. When Anne asked the woman for identification, the woman claimed she had accidentally left it in her car. Anne looked at the woman's car parked in her driveway and noticed there was a man sitting in it smoking a cigarette, which she thought was odd. The woman knew about her son's medical history and carried a file folder which seemed to contain his medical records. Both Anne and her son spoke to the woman in the doorway, but when the woman suggested they go inside to talk, Anne refused and took her son inside, at which time the woman beat a hasty retreat. In a case similar to Anne Wiley's, a man from Manchester, England, reported that a well-dressed woman showed up to his home and claimed to be investigating a case of alleged mistreatment of his children. When the man demanded to see her identification, she quickly ran to a car which had been left running nearby, in which 2 men were waiting, and the 3 quickly sped away. Another phantom social worker case, this one from Lancashire, England, involved perpetrators who were better prepared. A man and a woman showed up at the home of a Mrs. Carter, a nurse with 2 young children. The man produced a photo ID which identified him as a worker with the community's social services department, while the woman wore a scarf emblazoned with the words, "Child Protection." They claimed they were there to investigate reports that her children were not being fed properly. Mrs. Carter allowed them to examine her home's pantry, but refused when the man asked to physically examine her children, at which point the strangers left to a waiting van in which 3 other women, all wearing child protection scarves, waited. When Mrs. Carter's husband returned from work, the matter was reported to police, but as with all phantom social worker cases, the perpetrators were never caught. Naturally, these cases beg the question, has anyone impersonating a social worker ever successfully abducted a child? There are at least 2 cases where this has occurred, although both cases are not generally connected to the phantom social worker phenomena. Firstly, both cases took place in the 1980s, before the phenomena was known, and both cases took place in the United States, while the UK was the hotspot of the phantom social worker. In the first case, a woman who called herself Marie Kelly showed up at the Newport News, Virginia home of Vanessa Blockett and told her that the Department of Social Services was sponsoring a function for children at Riverside Regional Medical Center and convinced her to let her take her newborn son, David Ezel Blockett, and her 2-year-old son, Frederick, to the party. Several hours later, Frederick was found wandering alone with a piece of paper with his name and address printed on it in his pocket. David and the woman who called herself Marie Kelly have never been seen again. A composite sketch of Marie Kelly is on screen now. She is described as a middle-aged, heavy-set black woman. The Department of Social Services didn't employ a social worker matching Kelly's name or description. As an adult, Frederick claimed he had vague memories of the abduction and said that a man was driving the car that he and David were taken in. The second case took place in Dallas, Texas, in 1989. Emmanuel Khalif Burtz was a newborn baby who lived with his mother, Keisha Burtz, and grandmother, Hermaine Grady. A woman who called herself Deborah Manning and claimed to be a social worker made several visits to the family's home in August and September, ostensibly following up on behalf of the hospital where Emmanuel had been born. She apparently had access to Emmanuel's medical records and correctly diagnosed him with an eye infection. After several visits and gaining the family's trust, she showed up at their home on September 14th, when Emmanuel was home alone with his grandmother. She permitted Manning to take Emmanuel for a medical test. When the woman had not returned with Emmanuel by 8 p.m., the police were called. The abductor is described as a black woman in her 30s, 5 foot 6 inches tall, and 145 pounds. Her hair appeared to be sandy brown, but it may have been a wig, and she wore heavy blue eyeshadow. She spoke with a foreign accent, possibly of African origin, and she always showed up at the home wearing a white lab coat and surgical pants, whereas authentic social workers usually wear street clothes. Neither Emmanuel nor his abductor have ever been heard from again. There have been many theories put forward about the motivations of phantom social workers. The most sinister involve pedophile rings looking for victims, or black market adoption rings. Other theories include burglars casing homes, self-appointed child abuse vigilantes, or real social workers overstepping their bounds. Phantom social workers have also been compared to the well-known Men in Black phenomena, in which people who report UFO sightings report being visited by strange men who claim to represent various government agencies, who question them about their sightings, sometimes threaten them to stop talking about their sightings, and occasionally confiscate or destroy photographic or video proof of their sightings. As well, a similar phenomena in the United States involving phony census takers was sporadically reported in the 1960s. Although the phenomena largely died out in the 1990s, it continues to be occasionally reported. On screen now are police sketches of 2 women who posed as social workers and attempted to gain access to children in England, the one on the left in 2005 and the one on the right in 2013. As with the earlier reports from the 1990s, as of the time of this video, neither of these individuals have been caught. Number 1. Black Volga abductions. A Volga is a type of Eastern European luxury car, often described as being similar to a Lincoln Continental. The Black Volga abductions refers to reports of people, especially children, being abducted by people or persons driving a black Volga. The earliest reports date from the 1960s. The phenomena was most commonly reported in Poland, although reports also come from Belarus, Ukraine, Mongolia, and Russia. Unlike the phantom social worker phenomena, where it is accepted that there were real individuals involved, some believe the Black Volga abductions are nothing more than an urban legend. Indeed, the reports of Black Volga abductions vary greatly, ranging from the plausible to the fantastic. The first variations of the legend concern the Volga's driver and occupants, variously reported as KGB agents, priests or nuns, Jews, Satanists, vampires, or, in the most extreme versions, Satan himself. The second variation involves the abductees. Usually, the Volga is said to target children, although adults, especially those critical of the ruling Communist Party, are also said to have been targeted. The third variation concerns the purpose of the abductions. In some versions, the children are killed in satanic rituals. In other versions, their blood or organs are harvested for use in medical treatments for wealthy Westerners or Arabs. As bizarre as some of these stories are, there is some truth to some of the tales. In 1965, in Warsaw, Poland, a woman was visited at home by two women who claimed to be distant cousins of her husband, who was at work at the time. The women spent a few hours at her home, and she even allowed them to look after her young daughter while she went to run an errand. However, when she returned, the women and her daughter were gone. News of the abduction spread quickly around Warsaw, and police eventually located a witness who reported seeing two women matching the description of the abductors getting into a black Volga driven by a man in a military uniform. Police eventually located the women and safely returned the kidnapped child. The abductors, who were sisters, had reportedly kidnapped the child because one of their own daughters had been born blind and she desired a healthy child. However, the Volga and its driver were never located. This report is credited with kickstarting the Black Volga legends, although some sources say that the legend predates this report, having been known since the 1950s. It should also be noted that disappearances of adults who were critical of the authoritarian communist regime was not unheard of, and the sobering fact that over 200 children disappeared in Poland during the 50s and 60s cannot be ignored as well. Both of these factors likely helped the legend spread. There is even speculation that the communist government purposely circulated the more extreme versions of the legend, such as the version where the Volga was driven by vampires, in order to detract validity from real stories of kidnappings by the Soviet government. The Black Volga legends gradually tapered off in the 1980s, finally dying out along with the fall of communism. Thanks for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please like the video, check out my other videos, and subscribe.